but it also has this curve to it. So it doesn't just descend in a linear line, so just a straight line. It actually has an exponential curve. And you can also bend that curve on a timbre oscillator. That's a little bit more complex. And that's what they call them, complex oscillators or timbre oscillators. So the blade spins up. You can control the envelope curve and length. So how long that sawtooth is and what the curve looks like. And so we can do all this stuff, timbre oscillation, all of those thoughts, all those like applications go into the creation of bend. Without timbre oscillation, there would be no bend, because that allows you with bend to push and pull that waveform, and then also pinch to the apex of each compression and rarefaction stage, or even multiply it, or do all types of shit to it. So it's just really whatever the limitation of the code that you can come up with that creates a perfect kind of like form of that. You know, and that's where Serum is at, say, like with that, all of that knowledge kind of like combined. So you can make stuff sound very analog. You just have to know where to start and know how to emulate the signal flow and know how to make it sound, you know, somewhat organic. And so that's where the voice engine is going to come in here. We already talked about that, but we're going to kind of like expand on that as well. Okay. So just to kind of switch gears now and like, let's go into Monarch, because I just did a big old thing on West Coast, because West Coast is my home coast, but also it's like a little bit more complex. We're going to go into FM, all types of wave shaping and crazy shit. And when you get into Monarch, this synth is an East Coast synth. This is an emulation of a Moog. So inside of a Moog, you have a ladder filter. So there's 4 different types of filters here. 3 of them are low passes. You can actually see, gives you a little definition here. And 1 is a band pass. So there is no high pass in here. We have cutoff, resonance. For some reason it's just running already. Well, that's probably because it's like self-oscillating. All right. So cutoff, resonance, contour. What does contour mean? This changes this type of like notch, kind of like Q filter on top of the resonance, and that kind of creates a different curve. All right, but also we have this filter envelope here, so we can modulate that through here, positive or negative values. So just to kind of like rehash on like what these kind of like envelopes are kind of limited to, you can create some types of attack decay sounds or attack release sounds. So attack decay is kind of like one shot, hold it down and play it all the way to the finish, and then release mode pretty much will change this decay knob into release. So it's either ADS or it's ADR. Why is that going through my speakers? Shit was loud. Shit was loud, man. Okay, so sustained stage in this sense means where is the decay decaying to? You know, what's that value after the end of the decay stage, which we already know, because, you know, an always like kind of law, I guess, of envelopes is sustain is based in value and attack and decay are based in time. All right, so let's kind of look at everything here. We have two different pages here. This second page is like under the hood stuff. This is like global settings. So keyboard, how's the keyboard going to react? So legato modes, and I did paint this in the outline there, and that means to not retrigger, but it gives me functions with this. So priority to my polyphony, and I believe this can like hold like a couple notes. Oops. Actually, I don't think it can actually. But in Reactor, you're never limited like that. So say if you wanted to check if any synth was or wasn't polyphonic. So it is polyphonic, it's duophonic. Max 2 voices, but I believe that is for some type of internal function. So like right here, just hit the edit button. Click on your module here. So that's edit button, module selected. And then it'll probably be on this tab, which is search. So browser, you want to go to this properties tab. This will tell you how many voices you have. All right, so it does have 1. And I can increase that here, and then increase the amount of unisono as well. Actually, I have to like push that up before I can do this. But I actually don't want to right now because I don't want to blow up my computer while I'm just like on stream here. So, all right. So, yeah, Miri, want me to define unison? So unison, that's a good question. Unison means how many notes are played at one time. So unisono in Serum, you're going to be able to play 16 notes for one note. So that plays 16 copies of the same note and slightly detunes it with some type of knob. So that's kind of like the intro to that. We're going to go back into it with Serum. With Serum, it's like a lot more functional. So again, this is kind of like monophonic subtractive. All right, one sec. Let me just reload this before I go messing with underhood stuff. All right, so default patch, it's kind of where, you know, you think it would sound. In this little tab right here, this is the preset browser. So you can store all your presets here. All you got to do is hit add, and it will allow you to make your preset. And there you go. So then you can hit another one, add 2. Or you can save over and hit store. All right, so you got to hit this little snapshot. Allows you to see all your different folders full of preset banks. You have a user bank in here as well with an initialize patch, which is where we're going. All right, so that's a square wave. So let's kind of dive into the synth now. Preset library, easy. All right, so tuning right here. We have pretty much like the global tuning of the entire synth. We have fine tune of the entire synth. Keep on swishing around here. All right, so this is going to be glide modes. So always means it's always going to glide with this much time to each note. Legato means only when the notes overlap. Making some dub reggae. Alright, so I just want to turn on the release mode for a second there. So, sounds pretty good, you know, and that's kind of like what I like analog waveform synths for, is for like the weight of the actual filter oscillator combo and emulation combo, because you want them to be trying to do it. You don't want them to just be like, it's a saw, not a filter, you know, because that's kind of like how Serum works. And Serum is very much like, it's this, it's that, you know, it's not filtering and changing everything in the signal path. There's a lot of other things going on under the hood in between this stage in order to make, say, just this mixer affect volume in a certain way. So kind of like to emulate some type of, you know, signal flow in a Moog. And also just have voltage controlled filters here as well, so you can over resonate these and create, you know, like a really high frequency somewhere up there, probably around like 12K. Let's hear it. But then also you have feedback loops and noise generator here. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 oscillators. So in Serum you have 3 oscillators. I also made allusions to Massive. Massive has 5 oscillators. Well, actually, I guess Serum has 3 oscillators and 1 sampler. So this is like right when I said that, just the follow. Thank you for the follow, by the way. And it felt like I accomplished something just by saying that. Okay, so let's get into the oscillator here. What does this mean? We're just looking at 16.8 to, this is octave range. So low means well below, like kind of a listenable range for oscillator 2 here. So 16 should kind of be like the bass range. We're kind of talking about kind of just octave ranges here. So the equivalent to octave standards based on organ stops. The low setting puts the oscillator into a sub-audio range. So also notice there's no sine wave in here. So remember how I said those things were impulses? You know, the things in the waveform oscillator, that's kind of hard to make a sine wave with. So it wasn't until a little bit later where people were able to actually create additive engines, say like an organ, you know, where it was just straight pure sine wave and nothing kind of filtered. But you know, you can make really, really heavy subs, say kind of even emulating like an oversaturated sine wave by just filtering down one of these very hardy waveforms here, like literally any of them. And this one's kind of actually like a timbral wave because it has a curve in it, and this is just a straight up sawtooth. So you have all your basic waveforms here, and notice these two have a smaller square, so that's pulse width. And you can kind of modulate in between it, but that's kind of a limitation of this, you know. So all right, so another thing you can do with this, so I have this mod here. So activates oscillator pitch modulation via mod wheel for oscillators. If key tracking for oscillator 3 is set to off, it is not affected by the modulation. So turn this on, then I hit mod wheel. All right, let me turn that up. All right, so mod wheel here. It's pretty much acting like a little FM route. When I turn this mod on, it injects the pitch into oscillator 1. So key tracking off on oscillator 3, oscillator 3 does not react to any pitch information, and the oscillator can be used as an LFO in case the range of the knob or of the two knob is increased. So now that I have key tracking on here, should be able to route this into other things. So mod, plug that in to the filter, and we can use it like an LFO. So this is kind of cool when making like a respace or something like that with, you know, like a very basic oscillator like this, because you can kind of like have your tune react to this, like, you know, either like key tracking locked or non. So it actually responds to you changing the note. Oh, my bad. I'm sorry about that. All right, so is there a reason that pulse width modulation is only usually talked about with square waves and not sine waves? And that's actually a really good question. Josh and Jacob, my bad guys, really need like a little notification. Okay, so why is it like that as opposed to, you know, like a sawtooth? Mainly because this zero crossing is so defined. So it can actually create a different size of waveform by just modulating the phase start position. So the phase start position is kind of like zero crossing offset. So when you offset the phase of certain things, say if you phase locked the beginning and end of a waveform and then controlled the zero crossing of the other point of modulation, which is just where the square wave meets zero. So you just move that 0 point left and right. And that's the easiest way for them to do that, say like 30 or 40 years ago. But now, like if you're in Serum, it's literally just pulse width modulation to anything. So you have digital control of where that zero crossing is. So yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I really should just have a mod like ping me for like questions and stuff. That would be great. Because sometimes I'll go in and just start explaining the UI stuff and then kind of lose track of the questions for sure. Okay, so just kind of like understanding how all this works. Mod wheel triggers more or less of this oscillator 3 as an LFO. And so this is really typical on like hardware synths. You'll have oscillator 3, say like on the sub-fatty. That's really kind of like a thing for a lot of the modulation. I really love the filter on the sub-fatty too. That thing is awesome. Yeah, but so it's just really common, you know. And then if you start thinking about an oscillator in this way, you'll start to see how kind of like unlimited I guess it is, you know, because I can use this as, you know, modulating the pitch of this. So if I actually turn this really high and then actually keyboard track it, it makes it an FM sound. And then it also adds FM to the filter. So that's 2 points of FM. Yeah, exactly. So it has 3 oscillators in here, which makes it kind of more like Well, yeah, I'd say almost like a Voyager, but you know, it's not polyphonic. So it's kind of like a Juno, I would say. It's like a Juno cross, you know, really similar to the way the Moog grandmother is. The Moog Voyager is actually the only polyphonic Moog of that era, pretty much. And the Moog 1 is kind of like a revisit to that. And the reason why is because they really want to optimize their single voice. And they don't want to go and like muddy kind of the waters with like digital controlled copies of one oscillator. So that's, yeah, if you think about like what that even means, like, oh, we're not digital copies. It's like you can just hear how much like contempt is in that. Fucking West Coast digital shit. Just use 10 Moogs. Stack them up and play one note. Alright, so how does this work now? Let's get into the mixer. So on buttons, you know, this is going to be similar to Serum as well. So turn on the route, turn on the feedback, and this tells me which oscillator goes into that feedback, A or B, and then noise, pink or white, hence the color. Notice how they didn't include brown in there, which honestly kind of offends me as well. Yeah, as much as I represent like pink noise gang, I want brown noise gang to be there too. Alright, so that's pretty much how that works here. So we can offset and create kind of like a respace super easy with this. Oh. Oh, my lord, that's a large respace you got there, Monarch. Alright, so that is kind of like the calling card of like a analog waveform, you know. And like when I make shit in Serum, I'm really just using these basic things for like a respace and stuff, just because like I really like how, you know, summing works. And I like beating. Like this is the only type of beating I like. Every other beating can stop now. Taking a stand. Alright, so what does beating mean? It means when two oscillators are phase locked and you modulate the pitch of one of them by cents, very slightly offsetting them. And that creates a wobble in between each of those oscillators. So you have to have them phase locked, meaning in a monophonic synth, phase lock means start the waveform from the second I hit the key or the gate. On Serum, you can do that randomly. You can set it to different points in the waveform. You have digital control over it. So in here, you have full like block by default. And this is one of the things about Moog, hence why they stick to monophonic. I don't think it's really about them just saying, F you, Buchla, Moog forever. And then they just like burn Buchlas in the street and shit. Or like smash it in a field or something like Office Space. But really it's just about phase lock. Because Moog and monophonic synths are just like really about, you know, having a really heavy sub. So what makes heavy sub? You know, really complete waveforms. What happens when the waveform isn't complete and it's offset by phase? And this is something like that is true with all levels of audio engineering. Say if you were recording drums and you had an overhead mic and a bunch of tom mics and a bunch of other mics, and say you didn't know how phase affected your kick drum sound. So what happens if you don't know how that affects your kick drum sound and all of your mics are out of phase, meaning the start position, the starting zero crossing of the kick and each one of those mics is offset by millisecond values or sample values, you will not have a complete low end because the fundamental frequency will phase out and you'll lose clarity completely. So like if you're like mixing anything, like any real audio, you have to be aware of that. And like Ableton, it becomes a nightmare. There's plugins that offset the phase for audio for you, so you have to use that in Ableton. Pro Tools, Nuendo, Logic, kinda. You have that control where you can offset things by samples, but in Ableton, you are not able to do that. So that is a limitation of this. And I do not think Fruity Loops has that. So what that means here, and in FM synthesis and every other type of synthesis, if the phase points don't lock up on all my sawtooths, I lose clarity in my fundamental, which is again back to that fundamental. Fundamental, what am I talking about? Harmonic series, the first most defined harmonic that defines kind of like the pitch of the actual instrument. So the pitch of the kick drum is important. And on a top 40 recorded, say, gospel track, you know, they're going to make sure the kick is in tune with the bass and the key of the song. So all those things are taken into account, like at a kind of like top level of audio production. And most people don't know about that because that's kind of like a reserved piece of knowledge for them, you know, just because it's really complex. And also, we don't really have that much of that need anymore because we're all kind of just like in the DAW making everything from scratch. So it doesn't really matter as much. But when you're synthesizing stuff, it does, because you'll lose a lot of clarity in your low end. And if you don't understand that while you're mixing too, you won't be able to get your entire track up to like neg 1.5 LUFS if you wanted to. Like if you just were like, I'm gonna get there just to hurt people, you know, you can do that if you know how to work with phase and you know how to process the shit out of everything. So that is why I'm telling you this, because when I get into processing class, I guess Saturday now, that's going to be a huge part of it. And, you know, because a lot of people always ask me like, oh, how's your shit so loud, dude? It's like, that's how. Because I just know how to mix. I know how phase works. And I also know how to like mix in a lot of different stages. So I don't just have like one stage for my final mix on like a track I want to get like really big. All right. So, you know, that kind of covers this synth. There's really not that much more. We got keyboard tracking here. And that keyboard tracks attack and decay for both of these, I believe. So, yeah, Ori, to your question, just to talk about phase. So with a series of mics, how does that happen? So if you don't know how sound travels and you're not accounting for that, when you record your snare, which is snare drum mic right on the snare, you're getting the snare as it happens, the quickest, from the quickest, point of view. Eardrum right up to the snare drum head. Just, that's the sound I want. I want that snare to be just smack me right in the cerebellum. Josh, I'll get to your question in a second. But yeah, okay, so to that point, the fastest point that it's captured, the quickest. So if in my tom mic, I'm getting bleed from the snare drum and it's phase offset, so meaning the start of the snare transient is offset by samples or milliseconds coming through the mic bleed, it's going to pretty much diminish the snare drum's clarity every time that snare drum's transient is reproduced in every mic, not just the tom. So if you have 10 mics and they're all picking up snare, you have 10 points where that snare is out of phase. If you have the same problem with your kick, you have 10 points where it's out of phase again as well. So it's like, it's a nightmare with that. So you just got to be like pretty conscious of just how you're doing it and then how you're offsetting everything to actually be in phase. So in Pro Tools, what I would do is I would have my kick and snare be my main voice. And so when I want to go and have things sync up to other things, I go and offset it in time by certain amounts of samples. So, say if it was offset by 64 samples on the tom track, the snare happened 64 samples before it happened in the tom track. I would nudge the tom track 64 samples in the back in time. So it lined up and all those transients per track line up and all hit at once. So that goes back to unisono and voice control, is you want everything to happen at once. So if I offset these, pitches by any amount, I'm going to have beating. So back to what beating means, it creates a wobble. What kind of wobble is it? It sounds like a tremolo. So tremolo is a modulation to the amplitude. So if I have two sawtooths that are perfectly phase aligned to start with, and I offset the pitch, it changes the length of that waveform by micro amounts and starts to create audio gaps where it actually phases out. So it comes in and out of time with its own phase between both oscillators, and they actually modulate each other's amplitude. And so the farther they're out of tune, the faster that wobble is going to be. So that's why that, ties into all this. But to Josh's question, so like if you wanted the filter to like open up, or like say the modulation to open up as you played up the keyboard, pretty much, like say if you were doing an arpeggiator or something like that, that can be really cool with key tracking here because that rapidly happens. And you can also turn on release too, so that would like modulate your release time based on your key tracking now. All right, so see how we're doing on time. Perfect. Sick. 30 minutes of history, 30 minutes of mystery demystifying. All right, so like another thing I wanted to talk about was how to make sounds in this. How am I going to make sounds in this? What type of sounds? What sounds is this good for? Well, obviously, I just made a couple like decent sounds out of it by just harmonizing these sawtooths. And I can literally use this sound for like a jump up intro. It's already ready to go. You can also use it on a ton of other tracks, some kind of future-based thing, some kind of good vibes, happy-go-lucky, we can do it, I have a lot of energy, and I'm on the treadmill kind of vibe. And that is exactly what I'm going for. All right, so that can be achieved by just harmonizing shit. Harmonizing shit like this, whenever I go and harmonize, I always kind of like think about the harmonic series, so up an octave and a fifth, and that creates this really nice power chord, but it's like a big power chord. Power chord, what's that? Guitar. It's your fundamental and a fifth, and it's one of the easiest little chords to play. And then the power chord, you got an octave, so it's 1, 7, 12, but in synth power chord, it's 1 plus an octave and a fifth. So that's the mega power chord. That is the Kaioken times 3 power chord. But this is like right when he started doing it. He was just ripping his shit up. All right, so I'm gonna make a couple different like, just like basic synth patches. So filtering down all the way here. Turn off feedback. I can actually use this right here for my feedback loop. Oof. So this feeds back this entire filter chain. So filter goes straight to amp, and this is a very, very basic like chain here just for that. So because I have it so low, when I feed it back, it just dumps LFE in there. What is LFE? I just dropped the term. Low frequency emissions. LFE is what people tell you when they're like, hey, yo, can you make this feel like the Grudge is like watching you from like the corner? Or like when, you know, in Paranormal Activity, when something's happening. So that's just, that's LFE. So if I go and push that up with this level here, it'll probably get pretty damn loud. Alright, so instant 808 from a sawtooth. Alright, so what type of envelope is that? And I do have key tracking on here, so I don't think that really affected it very much. So I'm actually going to turn that off just to start with. I have release on this, so that means when I tap the note, it has release, and it doesn't just stop. So in release mode, sustain really doesn't do anything. Decay just becomes release, as I said before. So in decay mode, sustain has a value that affects the amplitude of a sound. So when I have contours set here, it's going to create a very, very small envelope, and it's going to smack you right in the eardrum. But also at the positive value, so it's going up. Negative value goes down. Positive up, negative down. So 0 to 10 as well. So we talked about what bipolar and unipolar means. Unipolar means one direction, all positive values. Or you can flip it into only negative values, but it is not bipolar. It does not cross 0 and collect 200 negative values. It goes to jail and then pays property tax like an ass. Alright, so I'm Gonna put a little bit of envelope on this. All right, so I kind of want to make like a percussive type sound. So if I make this more of like a attack envelope, you know, transient, meaning fast attack, it can be, you know, within the 0 to about 20, 30, 50 millisecond range. Kind of like what you would think with a drum transient. And definitely I want to introduce this now because we're going to be talking about drum synthesis a lot. And drum synthesis with this can be a lot of different things. Can be just using kind of like the noise section here and then band passing that. All right, so what would I do with this now? So now I'm going to use just straight up noise. And then I'm going to actually kind of create a drum out of it. I also want to load up a limiter just in case. Oof. Gonna make a kick. I'm a noise artist. This is what I do. I go on stage and I play pink noise and I scroll through it with the bandpass and people love me. I'm huge in like really weird spots in Germany, like deep ones. All right, so I want to make a kick here. So I'm gonna set it to decay mode, but just on the amp because I want it to stop playing once I finish or, you know, let go of the actual MIDI note. Say if I was making a hi-hat or something like that, I'd want to do it like that, you know, I guess with the release curve. Also, say if you're making a drum, I like to load this stuff up into drum racks just so I have kind of like a good starting point. So say if I was going to use like this right here, I can go and just kind of draw it in. Then I can go and like say make this my snare or something. That's just an option drag. And sometimes I do this, but I definitely do not start my tracks doing this. This is not, it's not like intuitive for me. But it is definitely something to know if you're ever going to try to make your own drums. This is like the most basic way of making a drum. This is now getting into Roland territory of like, how does an 808 work? How does like, you know, any type of drum machine or drum synth back in the day, what were they really doing? And it's very basic stuff like this, you know, kind of like over resonating, somewhat ladder filters. They're not exactly that. But you can have a really defined resonance or something like that. But yeah, so this is kind of like the place to start, is just basic noise. You can use white or pink. So pink here is really useful just for making kicks because you can actually like really get a lot of weight out of the low end just because it's more suited for low end. I think I can name this. Let's go kick. Command R, kick. It doesn't really tell me. Yeah, it's fine. All right. Just gonna close my snare for the moment. Make a little loop here. All right, so again, back to this right here, no release, it's all decay. So no sustain here means I have full control of the envelope. If I hold down the MIDI note and don't have it like, you know, release. All right, so when you make a kick, you kind of want it to be a low frequency. You also want it to be a low pass filter, usually. All right, so this MM here is kind of like more of their, I guess, ladder filter emulations. All right, so I'm creating kind of like a body here by pushing this resonance all the way up. So drum synthesis, like kind of like thought process, is you want a high pitch to descend to a low pitch very quickly. And that is the basic waveform for creating any drum ever. And that's the most basic way I can tell you that. So let's look at a waveform here. It's actually a good one, just because it's kind of like a sine wave based sound. Expand. All right. So you can see how it speeds up here, slows down. So this right here is a 5 millisecond pitch envelope, because I can see in time it goes up and speeds up right here, and for this amount of time here. And then the pitch, you know, I can check with the tuner or something like that. You know, that really doesn't matter for our purposes of looking at that. So pitch in here, pitch of the kick drum, really is defined on what is making pitch, and that is the cutoff point of this over resonated filter. So that means I need to have a very fast envelope that makes something at a high pitch to a low pitch really quickly. And so I'm going to make this decay here be about 10 milliseconds around here, and then make sure that's all the way up, all the way up. Then to get a little bit more definition on this, because this is where we kind of lose, you know, the amount of things we can do just because it's not that flexible. So scaling the contour will kind of change the pitch as well, but also just setting this cutoff down lower. So right around here it sounds about, you know, about 100 hertz. I'm just kind of like making a wild guess, but kind of sounds like that to me. We can also check it exactly. Then we're gonna hop into Serum after this. You know, so because you should be able to kind of like guess on how like a Dr. Dre sound is made, and I can tell you exactly what type of waveform Dr. Dre and that NWA shit is. All right, so what I want to do is see where this bass pitch is, so I can see that because this is the fundamental here. So around 40 right now. All right, so this is around 100 hertz around here. So I want to get it to like, yeah, that's about good, around 60. I don't want it to be like too much lower than that. But I also want to get more feedback, which is more tone. I can also run a straight up oscillator through here now. I can also feed that back. So again, the tone is kind of defined on the contour range. So different level of like knock, I guess, on that like higher part of the transient, because it goes up to a higher pitch on that generated over resonated cutoff. So probably the closest you can get to like a sine wave would be kind of like a triangle wave here. This gives it a little bit of wobble, just because it's actually feeding this back into itself now, and that's a higher pitch. So this is pretty heavy. Actually going to dial this back a little bit here. Hold this back a little bit as well. All right. That sounds pretty good. That's a good starting point for a kick. So there's like a little bit of like mid-range in there. These are really not even doing anything. So really the fundamental here is like I can create this kind of kick noise with any waveform, whether it be noise or not. That adds a whole other list of modulation to that. Also send noise to the modulation. So this would be LFO generation, where if you needed like just straight up low frequency rumble, you just take this sound, put another low pass filter on it, and it kind of sounds like the rumble of the earth. Alright, so this along with processing can kind of like make a really beefy kick here. So let's make a really quick snare drum before we jump into CRM. Alright, so like snare drums are actually really easy as well. They should be. Both of these actual patches should be really easy. Yeah, I'm just using noise into a cutoff, and that's really it. Alright, so on this snare here, and this goes back to like when we're talking about drum racks and all that stuff, I can change my play note, pitch this up, tune my snare however I want it. So now I kind of want it to be with the bandpass. Actually, this is still my kick, so I'm going to put this back here. Oh, this is actually my snare. That's cool. All right. So I'm going to go white noise here, and I'm going to push this up here. So we're going to go up in the higher mid-range. All right, so that's actually a good starting point. So I actually need something more in the tone of this actual snare. So noise in a snare drum is the actual snares. If I only make this noise, almost always comes out as a clap, as an alien clap. All right, so turn on when the route's here, turn up the volume. All right, so I actually want this on release mode here. All right, so that sounds kind of close where I want it. So now I'm going to use this play note. I'm going to pitch this up like an octave or two. All right, so I like sawtooths just for snare drums specifically. This actually can work pretty well too, just because it's a little bit more sharp. So it needs to be super short. So you just want to get like a taste of that to get like the actual transient. All right, so I'm gonna actually try pushing this a little bit harder here. So the load is literally just a saturation drive, just to get a little bit more definition there. Feedback B. All right, so that's a good start to that, and then I would probably put another layer of snare under there as well, and I'll do that in a second. Now I'm just gonna put some hi-hats in here. This literally takes like 2 seconds to make with all these things in mind I just talked about. Don't need to rehash them, but remember, high frequency to low frequency very quickly on a attack decay envelope. So now I'm going to make some hi-hats, and you can also do this with any synth. Alright, so this filter doesn't actually need to be as sharp. All right, so that's literally all that takes, and I can fine tune that. What I like to do to get like really, really nice snare tails and stuff is just run it through this noise in noise mode, and then maybe like process that with an OTT of some type. So much noise just coming out of it. It literally has like built-in noise. Should be right here. This is like emulation leakage. Emulation noise in the back. There it is. Literally just running a loop sample of a power amp. Alright, so this is kind of like your first kind of like introduction to making this kind of like sound. Snares are not really the best thing with this. I like to use Serum for a lot of snares, and I actually included a lot of snare patches with Serum, with that actual like pack I gave, because I just wanted to kind of start talking about that, because we're going to see that in every synth, and that's kind of the point. Is every synth is the same. All the Sun God synths were made equally, man. Yeah, it's very like industrial sounding right now. Yep, making some garage now. Alright, All right. Bring up a good point. So covering that there, because I'm not going to be like going that deep on patches here. So like definitely want you guys to kind of like be able to make these basic patches. If you can't, then you won't really be able to capitalize using this shit. Because if you don't like really can't handle making a drum inside of like analog or say operator or Monarch, then you're not going to be able to make a really crazy drum in here or even a crazy sound. So I just wanted to cover that there. All right. So anyways, we talked about a lot of stuff. Now let's switch gears to this. So already kind of sounds different. Sounds a little bit more thin. This is the basic sawtooth. So Serum is a spectral wavetable. So it's not like the other wavetables where you actually go and, you know, I guess just have like straight up samples and then crossfade between those samples. And that's typically how a wavetable synth works in general. I have a lot of stuff in there about the history of like wavetable synthesis. It's really not that important. There's, you know, PPG with, you know, it's like kind of a weird symbol. It's like GAMBH or something like that with the G. But pretty much they were the original company that pretty much invented wavetable synthesis. And what they innovated around like the end of the 1970s was that they included microprocessors with synthesizers. So that allowed them to go and take samples, read back through those samples, and recreate those samples. Like this terrible virus wavetable all over the place. So I really like the massive wavetables. They're just in there because I love them. But yeah, so they kind of like really allowed for microprocessors and DSP to be used inside of a synthesizer, and that eventually led to kind of workstations and all types of other things, including DSP. So I did give the example of Kima, and like every Yamaha workstation, and Kronos. Kronos, I believe, is I think it's Yamaha. I'm not sure. Kronos with a K. It's a huge like modular synthesizer, but it's like very wavetable based. But you can like program full tracks in it pretty much, and that's kind of the point. And a lot of those like full track workstations make a lot of their patches from like wavetables or sample banks. So wavetable synthesis is really just like the consumer form of synthesis because it's so accessible. You know, it's really easy to just know that this wavetable changes the sound over time. So, you know, I kind of talked a little bit about sync oscillation and other stuff like that. So we're going to actually talk about that a little bit right now. So I did, you know, and I do actually want to look at that definition just for sync oscillation before we get into like the actual oscillator effects here. So sync oscillation, and sync oscillation is actually really common with a lot of like subtractive synths, but Monarch doesn't have that. It has a feedback loop. So as one oscillator finishes a cycle, and these hyperlinks are for Wikipedia, and kind of definition too, I kind of added to it. But pretty much what it means is as one oscillator finishes a cycle, it resets the period of another oscillator. So what does the period mean? It means the full oscillation cycle. That is one period of, you know, frequencies. So let's undo that. So definitely check those out if you're confused on what that means. And I kind of like converted it to layman's terms here. So if the oscillator is more in sync then the pitch of an oscillator is going to increase. Then the pitch of the oscillator going in sync to the mod oscillator will increase. So what that means is that the more the start position is in sync with, say, the frequency of another oscillator. If the oscillator is spitting out, anywhere around 400 or whatever pitch, it's actually going to speed up the original pitch of its carrier oscillator by how many cycles per second that other oscillator is going. So it's kind of like FM synthesis, but it's really, 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 harmonic and has a definite result every single time. In modular synthesis, there's kind of like another form of FM called like exponential linear, and it's called through zero FM. With exponential FM, you can kind of create a sync oscillation sound. But the reason why I'm talking about that is we got these sync functions in here. We can see exactly how that works. So the start position gets modulated by an incoming signal. The incoming signal is this knob, but really it's just pitching it up. So more cycles per second, the higher the pitch. So it creates more cycles of one waveform in one period. So what does that mean here? So this waveform readout, or the waveform as it looks right here, is one period. So if I have one period here, then, or one cycle, I have the fundamental frequency I'm playing. I play C, that is C. But if I say multiply the amount of sine waves in this readout here, and speed it up. So now there's 2 cycles in one period. It goes up 1 octave. So in sync oscillation, it kind of emulates that, where now it creates kind of like an overtone series. All right, so it sounds really cool, really common with drum and bass stuff, really cool for FM and all types of things in Serum. Like, this is a really, really cool thing. If you understand like how to like modulate this with FM and really kind of like dial it in, remember how I said transient envelopes and percussive sounds in general, not just drums, they benefit from having a really fast change of pitch over time. So if I would want a really, really percussive Reese, I want to modulate the sync oscillator with another LFO and maybe modulate the coarse tuning, but I want to modulate the overtones. So sync oscillation modulates those overtones. So you might hear like how rough it is. So in here, and this is something that Massive introduced, it has actual crossfade at the beginning and end of the waveform. So what does that sound like? It sounds like those Rusko flips. Like, yeah, and that's kind of like what he was doing in Massive. And when you change Massive into like sync mode or format mode, this is what it's doing. But sync window half is less crossfade. Sync window full is more crossfade. So this should look like a format wave. All right. Okay, so that's just a couple things about sync oscillation here. That's what it should really sound like. What it's doing is it's speeding up the amount of cycles in one period. So it's not the same as FM because it's multiplying this cycle. So back to like Stosu's question that I was so rudely ignoring. This really, really affects every waveform coming in here now. So take the thought of pulse width modulation and how that made things complex there in theory. Now apply that to everything else. So we can do pulse width modulation here, and it just does that. So remember how I was saying like it's modulating the zero crossing? So that's pretty much why pulse width modulation works super well on a square wave, because the square wave is really, really clean cut, and it's literally just an on and an off. It's not a full cycle going all the way back like this. So we can hear what it sounds like. So you're going to lose your fundamental immediately, but maybe modulating it like that with an LFO can sound pretty cool. All right, so again, back to phasing out the fundamental. Like if I have no fundamental in there, it acts almost like a high pass filter. So that's kind of what pulse width modulation is doing to the waveform. So because a square wave looks like a square wave and is a square shape, kind of maintains a little bit more definition in that square wave. Because I still have this compression refraction kind of relationship here. I don't have a full complete cycle. So I maintain my fundamental while offsetting all the overtones. So it was kind of a way to change a square wave into a sawtooth almost. So when we talk about FM, pulse width modulation actually is really similar to phase modulation. Phase modulation is PM. So you have AM, PM, and FM. Those are the three types of like FM sounding, FM types of synthesis. Phase modulation, very similar. All right, so now relating that to bend. So notice how bend does not work, really, on an actual like square wave. But if I go to anything with like a full compression refraction stage, it's not clipped off like a square wave, I pinch with bend plus, so I pinch the compression and refraction stage towards the zero crossing. That's what I'm doing there. And then bend minus pulls. So it pulls from the zero crossing and does it like that. All right, so bend plus minus does both. Goes forward and back, gives you full flexibility. You know, it's really, really simple like that. All right, so what does that allow you to do? It allows you to kind of like shift all of the harmonics, you know, and shift the noise floor at the same time. Just because you're redrawing the curve of this line. So we've talked about bit depth. So the shape of your waveform affects how loud your waveform is going to be. The completeness of your waveform too is going to affect how loud your waveform is going to be. So if it clipped off at any point here, I would lose definition in my kind of low end. So this allows me to maintain my low end. Also use a pulse width modulation style sound movement, but then apply that to any type of like wavetable. So it's actually like a super good question, you know, to ask that, because it's like, you know, the only way to make it really, really usable. All right, so you can do that to really complex waveforms. So these are actually different overtones I just kind of drew in and was just drawing in, you know, different octave ranges based on how many cycles per second I was drawing in. So that's all calculatable, and we're not going to get in deep into that today, but we're talking about sync oscillation and pulse width modulation, all this stuff that changes the waveform readout and affects how that waveform is going to be coming out of the synth. And most people don't give a shit about that, but I do. So if you want to give a shit with me, here's how I understand it. Alright, so again, really complex overtones will give you really, really interesting sounds. So classic sounds from Massive, I believe it's in the hybrid section here. I remember one of the first like tutorials I ever saw was like Flenders is the one, but Mellowfant and Mellomantic are the really, really good growl waveforms. And let's just take all the bend off and hear why. Alright, so you can hear all those overtones on how they shift. And thanks, I'm glad you guys care. But you can also hear like the definition of those like overtones and stuff. You can also hear all the aliasing. Another side note about Massive and all its wavetables, those were all created in like FM8. So every single wavetable was trying to eventually be this, where you can draw in partials and like have a full sinusoid bank to draw in and recreate spectrally individual samples. That's the best way to do it and get a very, you know, accurate representation. So assign some modulation to that. And we got almost modern talking. Alright, so these wavetables teach us that having a weird overtone series that kind of sounds like a format. We're going to talk about what format waveforms actually look like in a second here. But that is actually really crucial into understanding how to like make a growl bass and also making really interesting like pads and leads and stuff like that. Alright, so this sounds super old, but you know, it's kind of like where it comes from. So, you know, where can we go? Everywhere else. So like I really like using stuff that has kind of like that bass line and also has a lot of weird overtones in order to get that kind of sound. So let's talk like very briefly about like what is a format and how do you make a format waveform, just to kind of like elaborate on that. It literally takes 2 seconds because it's literally a very, very consistent shape. And it's so consistent you can recreate these shapes that are inside of FM8, for instance, inside of Operator pretty easily. So I want to tie in a couple things here. And let me actually open up Serum and FM8 in the same kind of window here. Okay, so I can go in here, spectrum, look at the waveform, and I can see these partials. Partials are the overtones and the overtone series. Yeah, so exactly, Mary. It's vowel sounds in general. So like your voice and everybody's voice is kind of made up of this at the core of it. But then everything about our throats and how we speak and everything affects and essentially frequency modulates this baseline frequency. So format waves are typically made by skin. Believe it or not, they're made by skin. So if you wanted to really recreate like a timpani or like a big bass head drum, you want to use a format wave because the skin of some type of animal was used to make the head of that drum. So that is a really good baseline start. Also with making trumpet waveforms as well, really similar because it's skin contact on metal. So it's a format modulating another kind of like timbral kind of like character of metal. So like if you're able to kind of like find that overtone series in there, you can kind of access it. So like I really left this stuff brief in the notes because it's really simple, but I really want to just jump into this. And you guys should really know how this works. I shouldn't have to go and say, this is how you drag and drop modulation in Serum, because that's literally the easiest thing. That's massive 101, you know? So dragging and dropping, you know, without massive, that wouldn't be a thing here. We're going to talk about that more in depth in a second, but let's get in here. So I'm in the partial bank and I can zoom in. It allows me to see more or less. So no zoom, 512 bin. So bin means partial. So I'm going to go 2 times, which allows me to see a good deal. So 96 or 48. All right, just to start, we'll actually go on 48 here. All right, so we're looking at this right here. So this is my first fundamental. This is second, third, fourth. And then descends with that kind of like low pass, 12 dB per octave shape. Not 6 dB per octave, because if it was 6 dB per octave, it would actually look like this. It would be going down like that. 12 dB, TPB, so many B's. 12 dB would look like this. So, big thing here is to look at this, recognize what it means. So, what does it mean? I assigned a fourth format. What does that mean? That means that a format with the highest fundamental frequency being the fourth. So, what does that mean again? The format is based on this fourth harmonic. What does it also do? 1, 2, 3, 4 cycles in one period. 1, 2, 3, 4 cycles, fourth harmonic. It's all fucking lining up, dude. 4, 4, 4. Shit. Oh no, dude. No, bro. Alright, so if I go and do that here and draw that curve, bin 3 all the way up to 4. Now I want to kind of recreate that format curve. Descend at a nice like kind of curve here. I'll start to kind of like create that curve. So there is kind of like a variation right here, because this is now the limitation of kind of like just massive and FM8 in general. So they didn't have very much definition in the high, and they also kind of like alias things a lot. So definitely needs to be at a kind of like gentle slope here. And you can make that type of curve with the right click. So right click in here allows you to control a lot of things, kind of like the way operator works too. And you can generate a saw. You can randomize your low bins, which that affects all these partials that it's talking about. Randomize the lowest 64 or lowest 16. So you have a lot of like control here. So if I really wanted to make this kind of like look like exactly the same, I can go and start to process this waveform and kind of move everything so it kind of lines up. So this is what it sounds like coming out of FM8 right now. And this is what it sounds like coming out of Serum. I'm going to make sure this doesn't have any other. So the sounds are really, really similar. Serum is a little bit more defined. So like I was saying, there's a ton of aliasing going on, a lot of compression, a lot of shittiness going on in FM8 that makes it have that dirt that's really nice. So I like FM8 for that dirt. So if I go and change that waveform and say like second format, we have 2 cycles and the most defined harmonic is the second. So I can go and like make a little morph table. So right here in the plus button, it will duplicate. Now I can wipe my partial bank, do the same thing, create a format wave. So now it looks a little bit closer. It more than likely kind of like looks like this. This is probably what their sound kind of looks like. Just a bunch of modulation up here. All right, so that's kind of the basis of formats, and you can morph between them, you know, by using your morph filter here. So this is really cool for just making any type of wavetable you want. And say if you're going to make a growl bass or a Reese bass, knowing how to make a format filter, and say like, oh, this is a second format, maybe I'll go and make another format kind of spike here. And then I'll go and focus on more frequencies, add some overtones, another format type spike. So format spikes, kind of like exponential on their kind of like, I guess their slope upwards, and then downward is a little bit more gentle. All right, so now I can morph. Crossfade is like massive. Spectral is Serum native. Well, actually, no, it's not. It's a thing that's been used by a lot of different things. But what is it doing? It's pretty much converting every wavetable, and it's already doing that in order to have wavetables in here. They're not like recorded audio. They play them back kind of like they were, but you can crossfade literally just 2 versions of that waveform, or you can modulate the amplitude of each one of these little partials and stuff. So spectral, it sounds a little bit more, I guess, complex, and then crossfade sounds more gentle. All right, so now just taking that thought and applying that kind of like format, kind of like mindset here. I was saying from making a growl bass. All right, so, you know, that's kind of like a really good way to like literally make your own types of growls. That's kind of like the point of this, you know, and to take control of Serum. don't be loading up every single cymatics patch in the world. But also I don't think, I don't assume people do that kind of stuff for all their sounds and stuff. And nor do I really judge people for that really harshly. My kind of stance against it is really just on the fact that people sound very similar. So the more you use patches that are for sale, the less you're going to be unique, because you are buying something thousands of other people just bought. So it's not just going to be you having access to that sound. So you definitely want to be able to access those sounds, access the presets, know what's going on in them. So say if I want to make this even more complex, I can add basic waveforms like a square wave or anything like that, redraw the actual partials in here. Okay, so just to kind of make it clear, this is kind of what the homework is about, is just making wavetables and making some patches with those. Emo fant, because I'm emo. Alright, so kind of taking a step back here, because I want to kind of jump into this again when we import audio in a couple minutes here. But let's take a walk around Serum in general. Let's take a full kind of step through this. What are we looking at? What are all the possibilities here? What's happening under the hood? All right, so a couple things to start out with Serum, because I already know you guys know how to use this. So I want to show you guys some really useful stuff, and then kind of tie it all back into this. So we have two oscillators here, both wavetables, just talked about that. We have a sub oscillator. Routing by default should be going through the filter. If it's not set to on, then it's going through the filter stage and directly to the effects stage. So sub needs to be patched to direct out. Once it's patched to direct out, it is bypassing this stage unless set like that, and it will go directly to the master. So that's cool. You have basic waveforms in here, and you cannot modulate anything about that besides octave. But you can assign modulation to any of these knobs. Any knob in here is fair game, including counters. So any kind of counter that you see, you should try modulating it, see if it works. The noise engine, these are all samples. So samples of analog waveforms and attacks of drums. So this makes making drums in here really cool as well, just because you can do that along with all this crazy stuff on the filter and the oscillators. So it's super, super powerful. This is in 110 when I want to make a sample pack with you guys, just in general, how to go and just make a full library that's accessible to you and usable. That's kind of what you should be doing progressively as you're becoming more of a adept producer in general, is building your own library. And if you're not starting somewhere, then you're going to be very far behind when you decide to start. So you should be kind of if you're a couple years deep in a synth, your basic patch library should kind of look like that, where you're just kind of really random patches, a bunch of random folders, then maybe some other stuff, kind of in the synth that you like to use. That's the kind of stuff that you really need to kind of decide for yourself. What is your flavor that you like to do on this shit? Because I want to talk about phase plant and all this other stuff. I think phase plant puts this to shame, just because it's strong, big, strong phase plant. So when we get there, I don't want to, kind of lose people if they don't know some of the basic stuff about Serum. So just talking about just modulate that randomly. Just talking about the kind of signal flow here. Filter, again, button based. In order to get the flow here, you have to turn on the button. This means keyboard tracking. Each of these knobs does what it says. Fat knob is kind of like another level of saturation. Kind of the assigned characteristic of the assigned filter. Most of the normal ones, anyone labeled MG, is ladder filter emulation. These are all your basic ones, comb filters, and then experimental ones. You got EQs, ring mod, so that's like an FM filter, built-in oscillator into it. Sample and hold, cool for glitch sounds. Right here. Combs, it's a set of random diffusions, like diffusion shapes and stuff. Same thing with all pass and reverb. So we talked about how the comb filter works, and it's like a string of delays creating like a diffusion network. And here it's no different, but now we can like modulate the size of a reverb with the cutoff. So the reverb filter is really cool. I use it for a lot of stuff. I also use French low P and German LP for a lot of stuff as well. French is a little bit more resonant, as you can see. But that really is with the drive and the buff. It's all over the place. Quite frankly, it's all over the place. Alright, so German is a little bit more succinct, really minimal. It reminds me of like a German techno artist. Like, we got the tiniest waveforms. But that's what it's about. It's about the tiny waveforms. Add bass, literally just a peak filter. And then you got your basic format. So a lot of people think they can make a growl bass with this, but no. This is really for like percussive sounds, or like choral sounds. You can kind of do some growl bass stuff with it, but it's really, really high pitched. So, you know, you can shift where it is for sure, but, and the actual vowel shape, but it doesn't really give you that like gritty throat kind of like vibe. All right, so I'm sure you've definitely touched all these filters. We've talked about all the basic ones. These combine different filters all over the place. Really good ones that I like, all pretty much use all the time. High pass peak, it's another one. Really complements a growl bass or a reese bass super well, because you have like pretty much the basic format control. So back to format control again. This is way too bandpassed and phasey, whereas I can do kind of the same format movement, because if format equals 3 peaks like this, then I can use like a high pass peak filter to kind of create 2 different vowels or 2 different peaks and kind of create basic vowels like an E vowel or a oo vowel. Oof. Let's actually put this back in here. So pairing this with like movement, say I like bend. So you want this to kind of move up like this. And you kind of want it to like pinch. Don't want that. Right click, remove modulator. Alright, so really simple patch. I just kind of like showed you how to make like a virtual right sound. Like kind of really from scratch, I guess. Growl bass kind of shit. Virtual right is like amazing for that. High respect for that guy. I have his tables as well. I think they're really good. I didn't give them out because they're not mine to give out. So, yeah. Now to kind of like finish up the signal flow in here, this goes right to the output from effects. So effects, know that you can reorder stuff. Know that there's another filter in here. The filter in here is really, really crucial for making really crazy sounds. But also keep in mind that it's gonna really shape how you like create like depth in your patches, as well as assigning macros to them. So macros and all of your modulators do not get like untargeted, and this is huge. This is a huge part of the workflow of Serum, is that I can assign a macro to like say reverb just like this. I don't have to right click on reverb and jump through all these destinations and mod sources. All right, so this is a typical way a mod matrix works, and this is something you should be utilizing in pretty much every synth that has now made this kind of a standard thing. So, you know, on a patch that says reverb, on the macro, it should just be modulated mix here. And you can add other things to it to give it a lot more texture. So I do this a lot with like effect sounds and stuff like that. And this is why I really want to kind of like harp on Serum a little bit more, just because it's really accessible. So when you're making like a bunch of crazy sounds, like utility sounds, I make utility sounds with Serum all the time, just because I have so much control and the modulation is so clear cut. So that kind of like sums up that. Last couple big points just to talk about here is the voice engine. And you know, the voice engine in Serum is extremely powerful. It's kind of like Silent. So I don't know if anybody knows how Silent works. Silent is analog subtractive synth, and so similar to the way Monarch works, but not so basic. It's kind of like if Massive was an analog waveform synth, you know? So that's kind of how that is. But Silent was dope because it sounded really great, and like the waveforms out of there sound really good. And a lot of old drum and bass producers like Spore, E1, you know, that's like a Silent kind of sound. You know, I don't know about E1, but definitely Spore was like, because Feed Me was also talked a lot about using Silent for a lot of shit, and that's kind of like an old school Silent kind of like vibe. It's trance, electro, all that stuff, big room house. So that's where that comes from. But why was it so good? Because it can make chords. But why were the chords so huge? Because the voice engine. And so the voice engine, oh, I can scale this shit big. So the voice engine in this actually kind of changed the game, because what it did was it multiplied by the amount of polyphony. So I can give it 16 voices here, and now it says 128 max. That's huge, because in Massive you had you know, and actually, Ori, yeah, that's a good point. Diva is another synth that's very similar. I would say Diva is like the anti-Silent, because that really just sounds good, but also you know, maximizes your voice engine, and that's why it sounds so good. So again, back to this. If I go and push polyphony up to 32, now it says I have 512 possible voices. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So let's actually read this little hot tip pop-up. So pretty much what it's going to say is it's not recommended to max out polyphony while maxing out your unisono, because it scales, obviously, and when I add another voice, it scales again. So if I push 16 on both, that's 32 times 32, 1,024 voices. So that means that I can have 32 simultaneous notes with 32 voices per note. That's huge. What was the limitation of massive? 64. And it said if we go and parse those out, meaning give voice priority to different notes, then they would create fake kind of multiplication here. But really, massive was saying I only have 64 partials to work with, or voices possible. And so when it starts to overseed that, then it really starts to kind of like cut down on like the fidelity of some of the chords and stuff. So this will never do that, and it will keep the same amount of voices for the same amount of notes. So if you wanted to make some chords, probably limit this down to about 4 to 5. That's pretty good. Have 16 voices per note. So you can have a big sawtooth thing going on here. Filter them both down. Play some notes that are like a chord. I'm actually just gonna load up a chord MIDI. Let's go Jazz for Dummies. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna turn on keyboard tracking now. So polyphony means that it will create a copy of this entire signal chain, including the oscillators per voice. All right, gotta make sure that's on Serum first. Alright, so this will maintain the fidelity and, I guess, amount of voices for any chord that you decide to put in up to 32 notes. I don't know any time I've ever had to use above about maybe 8. Hence why that's kind of a good number for a lot of hardware synths to kind of cut it off at, like the Prof 8. It's a nice chord. The minor 10. What about minor 10? I like minor 10. Alright, so really easy way to make really thick, lush chords, and you can do this with Serum. Alright, so you can make like a bunch of different sounds, kind of like just straight out of sawtooths like this. You can make like every different style of music as well. Having a voice engine that allows you to control things with no, like, I guess, limitations in the amount of voices you can do allows you to make huge chords. So Serum is great for that shit. And knowing how to color things does not hurt. So that'll allow you to make really analog sounding stuff out of Serum without really like being limited by another synth that, say, doesn't have this kind of extensive of an engine. Really just knowing how to kind of capitalize on basic stuff, using basic waveforms, other things like that can make Serum really, really useful for that. I also included Omnisphere inside of that wavetable bank because Omnisphere is one of the most like commonly used synths in all of like film, just in general, TV, everything, and movie stuff. That's like the composers go-to for really, really cinematic sounds. But what Omnisphere is, it's kind of like back to what I was saying about it's like a digital audio workstation. And digital audio workstations, it's like what they used to call like those big Yamaha keyboards, had a lot of synthesis based in wavetable or sampling. And, this combines both of those things. So Omnisphere has a really, really extensive sampler along with wavetable engine, just like Absinthe. So Absinthe is actually the closest thing to Omnisphere that Native Instruments has, or like that I've been able to find in general. Omnisphere is still really great though. It's an amazing synth. The granular engine is amazing, and that's one of the biggest things about it. So you making like pads and all this other really, really developing kind of stuff. You can go and make this out of wavetables, and you should really kind of like think about like, okay, this is a wavetable, so I can modulate it over time. I want to modulate it slow, put it in a really large space,